Hi, everyone. This is Meghan. I'm recording this on Monday, January 27th. It's been nearly 3 weeks since the fires here in Los Angeles, and I have been not exactly couch surfing, but guest room surfing since then. I have just now landed in a friend's guest house. It's a one-room studio apartment in their backyard with a bed and a sofa and a kitchenette, and I am so happy to be here. Before I tell you more about what's going on with me and update you on the situation here in LA, especially the housing situation, my favorite topic. So we're going to talk about that. A little bit of housekeeping. I have been a guest on a couple of podcasts recently, not related to the fires. These were appearances that were lined up well before then. But you can hear me on Josh Zeps's Uncomfortable Conversations, for one, and also Mike Pesca's The Gist. The conversation with Josh was recorded about 36 hours, maybe, before my house burned down. And we were talking about a subject that I'm sure my subconscious is still obsessed with, even though I actually haven't really thought about it for weeks. And that is the culture wars. We talked about kind of the state of things with the new Trump administration. We talked about what I'm doing with the unspeakeasy. I think, you know what? I don't even remember what we talked about. That it feels like another lifetime. With Mike Pesca, that was recorded shortly after the fires. We talked about the Me Too movement, among other things. We talked about what I was doing with the unspeakeasy and sort of what's going on with women. And those two are really two of my favorite podcasters. They're both just so incredibly smart and talented, and it was a privilege to be on with them. So check out The Gist and Uncomfortable Conversations if you're not sick of my voice. Anyway, let's see. Here I am. I can finally put my stuff down, all this random stuff people have been giving me over the last 3 weeks, donated clothing, pet supplies, all that kind of stuff. Which is essentially in shopping bags, so I can put it down and have some privacy and even resume the regular podcast schedule. I talked about this in my previous dispatches. I talked about Altadena and sort of the kind of give you a sense of the geography of the fires. But if you haven't heard those 2 episodes yet, I urge you to go back and do so before listening to this. But just to recap, I lost my home in Altadena, which is the site of the Eaton fire. So there were many fires happening at once on January 7th and 8th, and they, of course, extended well beyond that. The Palisades fire, which affected the community of Pacific Palisades north of Santa Monica near the coast, was the largest. The Eaton fire was the second largest and affected this little unincorporated community north of Pasadena, right up against the San Gabriel Mountains, Altadena. A few weeks ago, I talked a lot here about that community, about the ways in which it's very different from the Palisades community and Los Angeles in general. The more distance I get on this thing, and I should say that 3 weeks out, I feel I have very little distance at all, the more I realize how lucky I was to wind up in Altadena. Despite all that happened, despite the fact that the town essentially burned down, I still really feel lucky to have been living there. Like I said, if it's possible to have an enchanted forest, huge pine trees, as well as palm trees and wildlife and people riding around on horses, if it's possible to have all that along with a remarkably diverse population, racially and socioeconomically, that would be Altadena. It's a really unusual situation up there because the areas that burned were not necessarily like the places in the canyons with the expensive houses, although certainly many of those were lost. But the area that really got hit was where the small, older houses, are just sitting on regular streets. These are houses that were close together, sometimes apartment complexes, businesses. It's worth noting that the part of Pacific Palisades that was just completely wiped out, and that's opposed to other areas that were just partially and mostly wiped out. That was also an area with relatively smaller houses closer together. And so what we have now here is just an enormous amount of people with nowhere to go. The latest number I'm seeing is 150,000 people displaced in LA County, considering that there were already more than 75,000 officially homeless people here, and considering that we have a massive housing shortage overall. This is just an incredibly difficult situation to deal with. Not that those 75,000 homeless people are in a comparable position to most of the fire victims. Not really comparing that, but I do think it adds some important dimension to this. For my part, for the last 3 weeks, I have been searching rather frantically for a place to live, a short-term furnished rental Airbnb kind of thing, or a regular lease. Though, of course, just leasing a regular house or an apartment would present a problem in that I have no furniture whatsoever. And by the time I paid the exorbitant rent on any of these places, I would not have much money left for furniture or dishes or towels or Wi-Fi and all those things you spend money on when you move. When I say exorbitant rent, I am talking about prices that tower over the already stratospheric prices for housing in Los Angeles. I'm talking about houses renting for $6,000 a month that are basically shacks with a shower. I'm serious. There was a place a couple of weeks ago that I got really excited about. The pictures looked awesome. It was up in the hills and it was more than I could afford really. But I thought, okay, well, it looks really nice. So maybe just splurge. And I got up there and I could not believe it. It was like you'd be camping practically. So there's that kind of thing going on. You've got bidding wars for rentals, including insurance companies getting into bidding wars for rentals. Landlords, of course, are taking advantage of this in every possible way. There are price gouging laws in effect that mean that if a place has already been functioning as a rental, a landlord cannot legally raise the rent more than 10%. But nothing can stop anyone from just listing their home for rent for any price the market will bear. And I am seeing houses listed for, and I am not kidding, things like $30,000 a month, $60,000 a month, and higher. These are not estates in Beverly Hills aimed at celebrities and the ultra rich. Those cost even more. These are, in many cases, regular, nice 4-bedroom houses in regular, nice areas. And there are people out there willing to pay that. So, at the risk of stating the obvious, the fires have pulled back the curtain on economic inequality even farther than it was already. If you own a property in the city that has not been affected by the fires, your net worth just went up significantly. By midday of January 8th, I think it's safe to say, you were a far richer person than you were 24 hours earlier. If the house you own burned down and you happen to have it paid off, or at least have a lot of equity and you've got lots of insurance, you will most likely be fine. Although it will take you longer to rebuild than you're probably being told. And I will definitely be covering more of this topic down the road since home building is a particular interest of mine. If you are somebody who is mortgaged up to your eyeballs, or you are one of the many people whose insurance companies dropped them in the last few years or even months, often with very little notice, you may be in a very different situation. Many of the people I know who lost their homes are still making mortgage payments. Most of the people, actually, and will continue to do so for the life of the loan, regardless of whether their actual house exists. Many will have no choice but to sell the land, probably to developers, in order to pay off the mortgage, at which point they'll be left with nothing, quite possibly. Of course, there will be all kinds of deals made and regulations loosened and bailouts offered, so it's much too early to have any real idea of how all of this will play out. But even now, it's clear that the big winners in this will be real estate developers and existing homeowners, and the big losers will be the regular people who lost their homes. Not to mention anyone trying to buy a home here, given what the prices will be and what insurance will cost. Though, let's face it, anyone trying to buy a property in many places in California has been on the losing side of things for a very long time. So the other night, I went to a party. Maybe that's a weird thing to do if your house just burned down, but I was excited to try out one of my new outfits, consisting entirely of used clothes from my friends, plus, free food. And of course, everyone at the party was talking about the fires. Everyone knew someone, in most cases, many people who had lost their homes. This party was on the west side of Los Angeles. I happened to be in a guest room on the west side, closer to the Palisades. So a lot of the people in question, the friends or friends of friends of people at this party, had lost multi-million-dollar houses filled with millions of dollars worth of furniture, artwork, musical instruments, Oscar statues, Emmy statues, cars, of course, cars other than the ones people fled in, cars still parked in driveways, cars parked on streets. There is growing concern about chemicals in the ash seeping into the soil, including toxins from the lithium batteries of all the electric cars that burned. Those batteries, I've recently learned, are huge. Like, they take up the whole car. In a Tesla Model S, for instance, the battery alone weighs around 140 pounds. Apparently, there were over 130,000 Teslas in operation in the Los Angeles area at last count. And there are reports of firefighters saying that the fires of houses whose electric vehicles burned alongside of them took longer to put out. I saw a photo of a burned Tesla still plugged into its charger in a driveway, surrounded by the rubble of the house that once stood there. So this kind of stuff, kind of like those images of the luxury cars abandoned on the road in the Palisades as drivers fled on foot, they're going to be ripe for mockery, probably. I'm pretty sure the late night hosts, once they climb out from the rubble of their own ruins, will have plenty of jokes to make about the unhoused lifestyles of the rich and famous. And there will be some, I can't blame them in some ways. I can tell you that I received a little beauty supply gift bag for fire refugees that included aluminum-free deodorant, 2 wooden-handled toothbrushes, and tiny activated charcoal stones to be used in lieu of toothpaste. So, yeah, okay. I'm just going to use regular toothpaste. But you know what? I'm going to keep saying this. I'm going to keep making this point because I know people are going to need to keep hearing it. And that is that these were not just rich people fires. These are fires that will be best survived by rich people and will make some people even richer. But even more people will suffer in ways we can't even imagine yet. The downstream effects will be huge. The people who serviced all these homes that burned, the landscapers and the housekeepers and all the other hardworking immigrants who buzz around in these neighborhoods and care for them constantly, even when the people who employ them can barely remember their names. They just lost their entire livelihoods. The small business owners that serve these communities just lost their livelihoods. A few weeks ago, I swung by to see my car mechanic. Actually, he's not even my car mechanic anymore. He only does Volvos, which I no longer have, but we're still friendly. I stopped by because I wanted to see if he could do something about a warning light in my car that had apparently been triggered by the smoke and now wouldn't go off. He talked about how worried he had been about his customers as the fires were going on. He told me that dozens of his customers had lost their home, lost cars that he had worked on for decades, the same car for decades, again, Volvo. He had not lost his physical business. His shop was still there. But the people who made his business possible were literally in ruins. I heard this kind of thing again and again. My accountant, when I emailed him the day after my house burned to tell him what happened, said I was the 8th client that day to send him such an email. It wasn't even noon. He instantly refunded the retainer fee I'd sent him a few weeks earlier for this year's tax preparation. God knows what that preparation is going to look like for him and how many refunds he will issue. My point is, there is this huge tangle of fear, uncertainty, and unknowns. The fire may be contained now. I think it's probably mostly extinguished in some places. It did rain last night, finally. But the after effects have barely begun. And as I sit here in my latest landing pad in this little studio, I remain very grateful, but also really sad and even scared. I'm sad about this city that I love, despite all the reasons I probably shouldn't love it. I do love it. I'm sad about the state of California, by which I mean the state of the state. I was born here. I did not grow up here, but I have lived the majority of my adult life, cumulatively speaking, in California, and I am a native. As it happens, I had just ordered a new birth certificate a few months ago. It was destroyed in the fire, as well as every single family photo I ever had, that my parents ever had, including photos of me toddling along the beach and of my parents backpacking in Yosemite with probably 8-month-old me in tow. It's so out of character for them to go camping that I would never have believed this if not for the photographic evidence. I love this place, even when it doesn't seem to love me back. And I kind of feel like I belong here more than ever now, because what is more quintessentially Californian than having your house burned down? I own the place now, even though I literally own nothing. Anyway, I will say again that I continue to be so thankful for your support here on Substack and elsewhere. You know, it's funny. In addition to everything else going on, I find myself in this odd position of having to create content in real time about this whole situation. I do it because I want to. It's interesting, of course, but it has also resulted in lots of you converting from free subscribers to paying subscribers, even though I am releasing these dispatches for free. And while that's great news, it also means that I need to keep at it in order to not lose these new subscribers. I feel kind of like Seymour Krelborn from Little Shop of Horrors, trying to keep up with the man-eating plant he's monetized. If you are inclined to help me separately instead of becoming just a paying subscriber or in addition to it, we have added a tip jar on the Substack page. It makes me cringe, but enough people have asked how they can help that we did add that. So you can find that along the top of the page. You can make a donation in any amount. Now that I am a little more settled, the regular podcast will resume very soon. If you are already tired about hearing about the new presidential administration, this will be the podcast for you, because I will be posting interviews that I recorded several weeks ago or even longer ago in which we did not talk about Trump, at least not exclusively. You can also watch those on the YouTube channel, which I would really love for you to subscribe to because that helps me a lot. You can, of course, learn about the Unspeakeasy, my women's shelter for the politically homeless. Am I still allowed to make that joke? I think I can make the joke. I'm homeless and politically homeless. By going to theunspeakeasy.com. Again, if you are going to the Substack page and not seeing immediately how to subscribe, just click on any of the posts and there will be subscribe buttons all over the place. There's a weird Substack thing where they don't let you put a subscribe button on the homepage, but just click on anything and there will be too many of them. If you're thinking, this chick has too many websites and links and businesses and newsletters and content, you would be correct. And my team and I are working to streamline all of this as much as possible. So bear with me. And thank you, as always, for listening, subscribing, reading, sharing, all of that. I will be back soon with another report. If there's anything that you're particularly interested in hearing me talk about when it comes to these fires and what's going on in this city, drop me a line and let me know. In the meantime, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you again soon.